Now we want to talk about different kinds of soils. And so here are three typical kinds of soils that are found. So the first one is going to be found in an arid environment. The second one is going to be found in a temperate environment where you have adequate rainfall. And then the third one is going to be found in a tropical environment in which you have a lot of rainfall. So let's take a look at the first one. This one is going to be called an aridisol. And so you can see that it has the word arid in it, which means it comes from a dry climate. So it's not going to get much rainfall. So that means that the organic layer is going to be very thin. Now, when it does rain, though, in a desert, it rains very hard. And so it does two things. One, it can wash away any soil that might be developing. And then number two, that water can get into the ground and it causes extensive leaching and eluviation. So that you can see that the O layer is pretty much missing because there's no organic material. It has a very thin A layer, and then the B layer is very thick, and you can see that this one has a lot of calcite in it. So where did that calcite come from? Well, if you look at the rock underneath, you see that there's some limestone down there, and that limestone will be the source of the calcite, and this calcite can chemically stick to itself, and then you end up with a very, very compact and hard soil as a result of this. So these kinds of soils are not very good for farming. Now let's look at the temperate soil in which you do have adequate amounts of rain. So you notice this one does have a good O layer, and it does have a good A layer as well. So these would be good for farming on. You do have plenty of organic materials. You notice it also has a zone of leaching and eluviation, and so underneath that is going to be a lot of clay and a lot of iron oxides. So those iron oxides are going to give the clay a reddish color to it. So here in Missouri, in the central part of the United States, under the ground, we have lots of clay, and then those clays are red because of this process. Then let's go to the tropical soil. Oh, I forgot to mention, the type of soil that you have in the temperate zone is going to be called an alphy soil. So Al in the alphy stands for aluminum, and that aluminum would be in the clays that are in the soil, and then the F stands for iron. So again, these soils are going to have clays and then iron oxides in them. Okay, the last kind of soil is going to be called an oxy soil. So OX, oxidation. So these soils are going to be highly oxidized. And these soils, you're going to have lots and lots of rainfall. And you might think that because of all of this rainfall, you should have a very thick organic layer. And actually you don't. So all of the rainfall that you get in the tropics is going to be absorbed by the trees that are growing out of the soil. So there is a lot of organic material in the tropics, but it's mostly in the trees. There's a very thin layer of like leaves and stuff that falls onto the ground, and then that makes a very thin organic layer in the soil, but it's very thin. And then underneath that is going to be a lot of clays and a lot of oxides as a result of the leaching and eluviation. So these kinds of soils are actually very fragile. So down in South America, where you have these types of soils, the farmers, they go in and they burn off all of the jungle, and then they farm on the very thin organic layer. And so for a couple of years, it works, but then they use up all the minerals and organic materials, and then they're down to the clays, and then they can't farm on it anymore. And then it's really difficult once you have lost that organic material to get the jungle to come back to be able to replenish that organic material, so that you end up with a lot of soil down there that is basically useless as a result of this. So those are the soils that you would have in an arid environment, in an environment in which you have moderate amounts of rainfall, and then in an environment where you have lots of rainfall. Now, there are many other kinds of soils. So these are the other kinds of soils that you can have all over the world, and each of these soils is going to depend on the amount of rainfall, and it's also going to depend on the temperature, and it's also going to depend on what kind of rock is under the ground in the first place. So if you want to go to the internet, you can study up on some of these other kinds of soils. So we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about how do humans affect soil.